Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be unpacking something absolutely fascinating today, the 1978 rat park experiment. This is a foundational study that literally flipped our entire scientific understanding of addiction right on its head. We're going to look closely at the original data, the historical context, and see exactly how just a simple change in scenery, basically, rewrote the science textbooks of the time. So let me ask you, are drugs irresistibly addictive? For decades, the scientific community, and, by extension, all of us, answered this with a resounding, unquestionable yes. I mean, it was treated as an absolute biological fact. The assumption was simple. If you introduce a highly addictive substance to a mammalian brain, well, that brain is going to become instantly hijacked, completely powerless to resist the chemical hook. But is that actually the whole story? We're about to bust a widely accepted scientific myth by looking at exactly how researchers originally reached that rigid conclusion. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand where this myth came from, we have to examine the original methodology. So, early experiments investigating the relationship between drugs and rodents basically put rats in solitary confinement. We're talking tiny, featureless, empty metal cages. Just imagine for a second the severe psychological toll of that kind of total isolation on a highly social creature. It's incredibly bleak. And inside these cramped little cages, the isolated rat had basically just two options to pass the time. Two bottles. One had pure tap water, and the other was heavily laced with a highly addictive drug, usually something like morphine or cocaine. There was absolutely nowhere to explore, nothing to do, just those two distinct bottles to choose from, all day, every day. Unsurprisingly, trapped in these miserable conditions, the isolated rats compulsively turned to the drug-laced water. I mean, the utter hopelessness of their environment drove them to obsessively drink from that drugged bottle. And tragically, they kept doing it, often right up until they overdosed and died. So the crucial point is the sweeping conclusion the scientific establishment actually drew from this grim data. Based entirely on the behavior of those desperately lonely, caged rats, researchers declared this rigid, dogmatic rule: drugs are irresistibly addictive. They logically concluded, at least it seemed logical at the time, that the chemical hook of these drugs was just so incredibly powerful that no living creature could possibly resist it. The drug itself was labeled the undisputed villain of the whole story. And honestly, this became the accepted, totally unchallenged truth for years across the entire medical community. By 1978, this grim consensus was firmly locked in. But then, a psychologist named Bruce K. Alexander came along and asked a truly revolutionary question. He looked at all this and wondered, wait a second, are the rats drinking the drugs because the drugs themselves are just so inherently irresistible? Or are they drinking them because they're trapped in a tiny, miserable cage with literally nothing else to do? He actually dared to question the core methodology of isolation that this entire scientific consensus was built upon. To test this groundbreaking theory, Alexander and his team built something entirely unprecedented. He created what he cheerfully dubbed Rat Park. And guys, instead of a cramped metal cage, this was a massive, vibrant rodent utopia. It had toys, it had winding tunnels, plenty of room to run around, but most importantly, it was absolutely full of other rats. It was this bustling, happy rat society serving as the ultimate stark contrast to the miserable isolation of those early laboratory setups. But here's the catch. The rats living it up in this vibrant rat park still had total, completely unrestricted access to the exact same drug-laced water. Yep, the temptation of morphine and cocaine was sitting right there, right next to the regular top water, exactly like in the old solitary experiments. The only variable that fundamentally changed was their living environment. Now, what's really interesting about these results is the sheer contrast. The socially connected rats, they largely just ignored the drugs. They overwhelmingly preferred the plain tap water. And even if they did occasionally try the drug water, they didn't become compulsive users. This completely, and I mean completely, subverted the original scientific consensus. It proved that this supposedly irresistible chemical hook wasn't actually so irresistible when the subjects had a stimulating environment and, well, a social life worth living. Which brings us to an incredibly powerful final thought to leave you with today. Is it the drug or is it the page? Because this explainer isn't just about some rodents in a lab from 1978. It's really about how we fundamentally view connection, society, and our own environments. The rat park experiment challenges us to realize that addiction isn't merely this inevitable chemical hijacking of the brain, it's profoundly influenced by our surroundings, our sense of isolation, and the strength of our social bonds. So, as you take this fascinating piece of scientific history with you today, I really encourage you to ask yourself, how might the cages we build, or perhaps the ones we find ourselves in, be shaping the behaviors we struggle with the most? Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. Keep learning, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.